के बारे में बात करूंगी। लेकिन इंडिया शब्द अपने आप में एक ऐसा शब्द है जो हमें कहता है कि हम इंडिया हैं, हम भारत हैं, हम हिंदुस्तान हैं। फाइनली हम हैं क्या? ओके, तो हम मान लेते हैं कि जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के अंदर निकल के आ रहा है ना, वही इंडिया है। लेकिन अगर हम अपने जिस रीजन के अंदर रहते हैं, जिस ज्योग्राफिकल जोन से हम अपने आप को आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं या कल्चरल जोन से हम आइडेंटिफाई करते हैं, तो उसको अगर देखा जाए तो शब्द इंडिया जो भारतीय संविधान के अंदर आया है बहुत छोटा पड़ जाता है। तो इसलिए हम अपने आप को भारतीय कह देते हैं कि भारत की संतति। राइट, आई विल नॉट गो इनटू दिस लेजेंड दैट हम भारतीय संतति कैसे है, क्योंकि आप सभी लोग इस चीज के बारे में जानते हैं। लेकिन एक चीज जिसके बारे में हम सभी एग्री करते हैं, जो कि दो जगहों से हमें बहुत अच्छे तरह से पता लग जाती है। एक तो वैदिक लिटरेचर का अध्ययन करने से, और दूसरा जब हम आर्कियोलॉजिकल साइट, हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन जिसको कहते हैं, आप इंडस वैली सिविलाइजेशन कहते हैं, अगर उसके अवशेषों को देखते हैं और वहां से जो अवशेष निकले हैं, रिपोर्ट्स को देखते हैं, तो हमें एक चीज तो पता है कि हमारे जो भी ज्योग्राफिकल जोन है या कल्चरल जोन है, वहां पे परंपरा थी कि आप नॉलेज को जनरेट कीजिए और उस नॉलेज को आप डिसेमिनेट कीजिए। ओके, मैं शब्द नॉलेज का इस्तेमाल कर रही हूँ, ज्ञान का इस्तेमाल कर रही हूँ, मैं जो हूँ इंफॉर्मेशन शब्द का प्रयोग नहीं कर रही। देयर इज अ डिफरेंस बिटवीन नॉलेज एंड इंफॉर्मेशन। नॉलेज जो है वो जो है पूरे लॉन्ग ड्रॉन प्रोसेस के थ्रू जो है अब जो है कि अर्जित की जाती है, और इंफॉर्मेशन जो है वो पड़ाव होते हैं नॉलेज की एनालिसिस के अंदर। हो सकता है आप लोग इस चीज को दूसरे तरीके से रखना चाहें, क्योंकि आप लोग विभिन्न डिसिप्लिन को बिलोंग कर रहे हैं। तो अगर ये मैं मान के चलूं कि आप लोगों में साइंस डिसिप्लिन के लोग हैं, और अगर हम साइंस के हिसाब से चलें, तो साइंस क्या है, किसी भी चीज को पद्धति या सिस्टम की तरह से किया जाए, स्टेप बाय स्टेप किया जाए, तो वो साइंस है। अगर इसको हम अडॉप्ट करते हैं तो ये अप्रोच साइंटिफिक अप्रोच का मतलब डिसिप्लिन साइंटिफिक इन नेचर है, वेदर दे बिलोंग टू ह्यूमैनिटीज, सोशल साइंसेज और साइंस एंड टेक्नोलॉजी। तो हम नॉलेज के ऊपर बात करेंगे, इसलिए जब हम वैदिक साहित्य को देखते हैं तो आप क्या देखते हो कि वहां पर आपको छोटी छोटी कहानियां हैं जो कि आपको पुराण में मिल जाती है, जो बहुत बाद में आती है। लेकिन आपके पास ईश्वर के द्वारा दिए हुए वेद भी हैं। तो ऋग्वेद सबसे पुराना है, और जब ऋग्वेद की हम एनालिसिस करते हैं तो पता लगता है कि कुछ जो थे स्पेशल लोग थे जिन्होंने उसका उत्पादन किया, फिर उस उत्पादन को श्रुति और स्मृति के माध्यम से आगे तक उसको बढ़ाया। तो ये एक बहुत सिंपल तरीके से मैं आपको रख रही हूँ, ये बताने के लिए कि कहीं ना कहीं ये प्रणाली जो है अध्ययन और अध्यापन की ओर हमें इंगित करती है। अगर हम हड़प्पन सिविलाइजेशन को देखें तो उसमें भी आप ये देख रहे हैं कि किस तरीके से जो शहरी सभ्यता की साइट है या जो है रूरल सभ्यता की साइट है, वो दो भागों में विभाजित है। लेकिन वहां पर भी कहीं ना कहीं हमें आइडिया लग रहा है कि ज्ञान अर्जन और ज्ञान का जो है डिसेमिनेशन वहां पर भी हो रहा है। तो ये भारत की स्थिति है। अगर मैं विश्व के साथ हूं तो इजिप्शियन सिविलाइजेशन को देख सकते हैं, हम चाइनीज सिविलाइजेशन को भी देख सकते हैं। तो मूल में बेसिकली क्या है कि एक व्यक्ति या अनेक व्यक्ति किसी भी संदर्भ में ज्ञान का अर्जन करते हैं, उस ज्ञान को अर्जन करने के लिए वो समय लगाते हैं, फिर उस ज्ञान अर्जन को डिसेमिनेट करते हैं। तो एक परंपरा शुरू हो जाती है ज्ञान अर्जन और ज्ञान विसर्जन की, दैट इज प्रोडक्शन एंड डिसेमिनेशन। और अगर हम भारत के संदर्भ में देख रहे हैं, और अब मैं थोड़ा सा इतिहास के ऊपर आ रही हूँ, तो हम ये देखेंगे कि भारत के अंदर जो एजुकेशन थी और जिसका जो प्रमाण है, जो बहुत बड़ा मापदंड है, वो हमको कुछ विश्वविद्यालयों के अंदर मिलता है। तो जैसे मैं अभी आपके सामने बात करूंगी नालंदा विश्वविद्यालय की, थोड़ा सा हिस्ट्री के अंदर जाते हुए। चलिए सबसे पहले हम तक्षशिला के बारे में बात करते हैं, जो कि आज के भारत में नहीं है बल्कि आज के पाकिस्तान में है। Takshila was the earliest recorded center of higher learning in India from possibly 8th century BCE, and it is debatable whether it could be regarded a university or not in modern sense, since teachers living there may not have had official memberships of particular colleges, and there did not seem to have existed purpose-built lecture halls and residential quarters in Takshila. In contrast to the later Nalanda University, which is in Bihar, Nalanda was the oldest university system of education in the world in the modern sense of university. There, all subjects were taught in Aryano Pali language. We also come across many Buddhist monasteries where education was imparted, knowledge was generated, and some of them are, of course, Nalanda in Bihar, Manasa in Nagpur. That is very important. I think that you have heard of it. And what was happening here, as Buddhist monks were involved, the medium of say production and dissemination of language had been Pali. Grammar was the main thing. The literature was main thing. The Buddhists were the teachers. The Brahmins were the teacher, and accordingly, you see that this tradition continued in all parts of the country. So if you come to Gujarat, from where I belong, you will come across the institutions over there. And it is over a period of time that educational institutions got established. And finally, we come across the Gurukul Vyavastha. By saying so or reading this excerpt from an article, by giving you an idea of the old universities, my whole idea is that the knowledge formation or knowledge production and knowledge dissemination had been a constant process. Uh, this situation, in fact, continued in the medieval centuries also, and we were having two systems. One which in fact can be identified with the Indian tradition, and the other can be identified with Central Asian traditions, because the invaders who were coming from West Asia, Central Asia, they came with their culture, and in fact they wanted to continue with their identity, and therefore in order to establish their identities, separate systems got cultivated. That was not enough, because other than Islam, you have seen Christianity coming in the geographical zone or the cultural zone. So it was Christianity where you see they imparted education, the missionaries became an important source. One more element that was present in India was the Parsis. So when we are talking about India, when we are talking about education, when we are talking about education system, right, several things were existing, right? And it's not only that the education was for one discipline or other discipline, it was for different discipline. If I start speaking of craftsman, we will find that is entirely a separate tradition. Today we see that all these things are taught in a college, in a university, but this was not the situation in the ancient past, in the medieval past, or even in the colonial past also. These institutions continued to exist. So what had happened, that when we became free, we have to undergo a separate process. The separate process was that a national policy was created, and this national policy which got made was for British India. I'm not talking about the independent India at the moment. So for 15-20 minutes, I would be sharing with you information related to how education under the British had started taking shape, because that became the base for the education policies that got made in India in 1968 during the prime ministership of Indira Gandhi, or later on during the prime ministership of Rajiv Gandhi, and finally the present document which we will be engaging in a larger way under the prime ministership of Shri Narendra Modi ji. So first of all, I would like to start talking with the case of British India. So if we go into history and evolution of the Indian education system, we should understand few facts that had started taking shape under British India. When Westerners came here, they have already developed a system, and this system had started taking shape more concretely after the Renaissance period. And all of you know that Renaissance period in Europe started from the 15th century. That was the time when Renaissance started. They started for critical thinking, they had gone for enlightenment, and it is here new inventions had started taking place, which in fact changed their economy. And I am referring to various phases of the industrial revolution. So the change they have seen in themselves, and by 16th and 17th century, for economic reasons and of course for political gains also, they started moving in various directions of the globe, and they were successful in establishing their hold after defeating the Dutch in the Battle of Vandewash. And what you see that in the beginning of 19th century, they were coming with policy documents. So the first policy document which I am referring to you is the Charter Act of 1830. If the group is having history teacher, they know pretty well that why I had brought in the Charter Act of 1853. Charter Act of 1813 constitutes a landmark in the educational history of British India. The Section 43 of the Charter Act 1813 contained the first legislative admission of the right of education in India in the public revenues. The said section only defined the objects of the educational policy, the revival and improvement of literature, one, the encouragement of learned natives of India, and the introduction and promotion of knowledge of sciences among the inhabitants of British territories in India. Well, if you look into the document in detail, it had no directions regarding the methods to be employed to secure these objects. So the Charter Act of 1813 can be seen where the colonizers were trying to give a vision, okay, but implementation of the vision is not there. All of us, you know about Lord Macaulay, who arrived in India. The General Committee of Public Instructions was formed in 1823. The committee's primary aim was to guide the company, that is East India Company, on the matter of education. The Orientalists dominated the committee and advocated the promotion of Oriental learning rather than the Anglican one. The Committee of Public Instruction consisted of members with Oriental attitude till 1824. Subsequently, when new members were recruited, the committee lost its homogeneous character, and it was in 1835 the differences of the opinion over the competing aims of Oriental and Occidental learning began to come to surface. As a result of Orientalist Angelicist controversy, the spread of education in India was halted until 1835. So the period between 1813 to 1835 has been null and void. The charge was eventually renewed in 1833 for another term of 20 years. It did not contain any direct educational clauses but added a law member to the Executive Council of the Governor General of Bengal, which had hitherto consisted of 3 members only. So the first law member who got appointed was Lord Macaulay, whose name we often hear on educational platforms, on political platforms, on economic platforms also, because Macaulay, who in fact tried to shape the beginning of education on the Western pattern in India, is also considered to be a person who actually hampered the growth of India, and in fact it became exploitative in nature. So Macaulay is applauded in the West, but in the East, when it comes to case of India, right, Macaulay has undergone a severe critical analysis also. So when Macaulay was here, and he was here by saying that he wants to promote the production of knowledge, particularly knowledge of sciences, and he wanted that English should be the medium of instruction, and instead of Arabic or Sanskrit being the medium of instruction, because he considered that it is the privilege of Europe. So I will not go into that kind of thing because it will not help in delineation of the theme. I should also bring in Lord William Bentinck, who in 1835 on 7th March come out with a resolution. So I am reading this resolution and in fact sharing with you that how Macaulay thought of shaping education in India and what contribution William Bentinck had done. So the pathway for the move in new kind of education in India got initiated. Lord William Bentinck was a British soldier and a statesman. He served as a Governor General of India from 1828 to 1835. He endorsed the minute by writing one line beneath it: I give entire concurrence to the sentiments expressed in the minute. He passed a resolution of March 1835, which was the first declaration of the British government in the sphere of education in India. The resolution of March 1835 eventually determined the aim, content, and medium of instruction in India. Promotion of Western science and arts was acknowledged as the avowed object of the British government in India. Bentinck's proclamation gave birth to the following results in Indian education. Point wise, I am highlighting these things before you so that you can get connected with the national education policies that took shape in 1968, 1986, its revision in 1992, and finally what you have in 2020. So the proclamations that gave birth in the Indian education were, first of all, the aim of education of India determined by the British was the promotion of Western arts and sciences. That is one. Printing of Oriental work had to be brought to a pause. New grants or stipend to the student of Oriental institutions to be stopped. Medium of education be replaced by English. The proclamation promised to supply government with English educated Indian servants, cheap but capable at the same time. And all of you know about it, that this was like striking in a negative way to what the Indian civilization has earned for centuries together. And in fact, was like a paradigm shift. We had been hearing about NEP 2020, and when Prime Minister was talking about it in Man Ki Baat, he said that this will be changing, or this will be a paradigm shift. So now one paradigm shift had happened in 19th century, and the paradigm or the pattern that evolved in the mid of the 19th century, right, continued throughout the centuries, and it is only in the 21st century, right, we are getting into a direction where we can bring in the change. So now you just see that with the change of the political power, the change in education, the change in social thought process, the change in economy, and the change in the culture also gets implemented, because this is a part of the process. And therefore education is considered to be a very vital instrument to bring in the change. Yesterday I was speaking on two platforms, one in Sony in this university only, and in the evening I was talking in Central University Sikkim, right? And I think that intelligentsia present at the two places on the online platform, all of us have agreed that education is a most potent or vital instrument to bring in the change. You can always ask a question that why change? All of us know that change is inevitable, and when change is needed, naturally the resistance is there. Okay, so the change can be brought through resistance, but change can be brought through compulsion also. So the change that we are seeing in the colonial period, it was a compulsory kind of exercise, which in fact got implemented through force. And all of us not forget the episodes that had happened during the third battle of Panipat, then followed by your first battle of Plassey, battle of Buxar, battle of Vandivash, the Carnatic wars, of course, several other wars that had happened. And finally what had happened, the colonizers in form of English, they were successful in having their holds in all the directions of the Indian peninsula, and it is by 1835 they were successful in announcing their aims very clearly. If you look into their policies, initially they were hesitating, but finally they have come with their full colors. And what had come actually was that big stopovers on what had existed, what had got cultivated for centuries together. And all of us know, the archaeological evidence is clearly prove now that the Indian civilization, in fact, or the Bharatiya Sabhyata is basically 5,000 years old. And there is a continuity over there. There is basically the cultural exchanges. There are political exchanges also. But the political exchange that happened in 17th and 18th century, which left it deep-rooted mark, was in the form of establishment of companies rule in India. Later on, companies being taken over by the crown. So if you are a student of history, or if you have interest in history, you know these dates which are important for the process of crown coming and controlling. And here, when I am talking about the history and evolution of Indian education system, which we will be delving and extending it to NEP 2020, I am just making you understand that what came from Britisher was for job reasons, because the education policy that got constructed in the post-colonial period in 1968, 86, 92, right, it was for job reasons, for professional skills reason. And in fact, we will be analyzing the NEP 2020, that why it is coming from the desk of the Prime Minister, that it will lead to paradigm shift. Okay, so we will be talking about paradigm shift also in a theoretical framework, if time permits, at the end of the lecture. So the policy that had come when William Bentinck had made such proclamation, this in fact is identified as a theory, the policy of downward filtration. In the beginning of the 19th century, the British rulers thought that in order to run the British rule in India peacefully, it is essential to make higher classes blind followers of the government. This they wanted to achieve through educating the higher classes. According to this famous doctrine, education was to permeate the masses from the above, drop by drop from the Himalayas of the Indian life. Useful information was to trickle downwards, forming in time a broad and stately stream to irrigate the thirsty plains. So I am putting this thing in a lucid way, but the reasons for adopting filtration theory was that British rulers needed educated employees to run the commerce and administration. The government did not receive sufficient funds for educating the masses. The educated people educated on British line through English medium would get higher posts in government services, and in return, they would use their influence in controlling the masses from going against the government rule. After educating some people, the responsibility of educating the masses could be left to them. And just imagine the kind of model that is coming up in the post 1835 period, which in fact continues to exist even today. When I am coming out with these simple statements before you, your brain is working, and in fact is giving you an idea that how these points which I had come out or placed before you are very, very relevant. Okay, so just I would like to give you some data also. Say for example, William Adam, who lived in between 1789 to 1868, in 1835 carried out a survey, and this survey was on the state of education in Bengal and Bihar. Right, Adam submitted 3 reports between 1835 to 38 and the later period also. Third report, in fact, was same what I have just put before you in 3 points. So next move in order to bring situation under control, or to extend their sphere of influences, a Wood Respect in 1854 came. So remember 1835 and finally 1853-84. So the Charter Act of the East India Company was to be reviewed in 1853 by the British Parliament. The British Parliament appointed a special parliamentary committee to suggest a suitable educational policy for India. The committee made a thorough evaluation of the educational policy followed by the company in India. On the basis of this evaluation, a dispatch, that is a policy document on education, was prepared for the functioning of education system in India, and Charles Wood was the president of the Board of Control for India. The dispatch was christened as Education Policies in India under the British rule. The objective of the dispatch was not only to produce a higher degree of intellectual fitness, but to raise the moral character and to supply with servants. The function of education was to diffuse European knowledge, that is art, philosophy, science, and literature. English and vernacular languages of India would be the media for the diffusion of European knowledge. An immediate outcome of this dispatch was the passing of the three University Acts of 1857. Uh, uh, I'm taking a pause for a minute. I am receiving a call again and again from my university. हाँ बोलो बेटा. I am in the lecture. Okay. That is why I was not able to pick. Okay. Okay, just wait. Sorry. So the function of education was to diffuse European knowledge in terms of art, philosophy, science, and literature. So when I say these four things, just imagine if you are of, just think about your father, your mother, or your grandfather, what they used to say about education, the kind of books they were studying. I can give you my example. I am 51 and I had an opportunity to start to do my primary education in three kind of school. One was the Chungi school, okay, because my whenever there was holiday and Chungi school was open and my school was not open, my mother used to take me to that Chungi school, and I was sitting on the floor, right, and the students from villages and all were coming, and I was in a district headquarter Eta, but I was studying at a convent school, Saint Assisi convent. These are very few schools, of course, established by Francis the missionary. I had an opportunity to go to other school also. So that way you see that every town and city in India was having missionary schools. Okay, neither Muslims nor Hindus hesitated in sending their children to these convent schools or the missionaries school for simple reason. The idea was that if our child will learn English, they will be better off in terms of being civilized. That was one. Two, they will be getting good services. And I think that I was also trained in that. But I had an opportunity to go to a Chungi school also. So being a student, I got exposure of what was existing in my city's culture, in my town's culture, right? But there was a huge difference when we cleared our 10th, 12th, the kind of colleges we got admitted, and finally, what you see that we got jobs. That also become very, very important. So now you see that what the Britishers have visualized in 1813, in 1823, 1835, 1854, right? It was so deep rooted that it happened. And when you take me, I am an ordinary teacher of history. But if we think in terms of Aurobindo Ghosh, if we think in terms of Subhash Chandra Bose, if we think about Swami Vivekananda, who in fact also have got education in the same way, the pattern was not different. Even if I talk of Maharaja Sayaji Rao, see, he was learning English education because he has to become the ruler, and he was an adopted child in the Gayakwar family, a child who in fact belonged or was a son of a person who used to move with the domestic pets. Say the Gayakwads, they are basically Gaya Charane wale. So the term is that. So the boy who was only 8 years old was brought into the palace. The Maharani was having many children before us. These three child came. So she asked that why you are here. He said, I am here because I have to rule. and the boy was so focused. The boy was Gopal Rao. Later on, he became Maharaja Sayaji Rao III. Right? He was adopted. So what happened, if you look into the data is available on the web pages also, that he was actually learning for 12 to 13 or 14 hours the in the under English education pattern. But at the same time, the mother was taking care of the child, and he was also being taught in the traditional system. So when Gopal Rao emerges as a ruler, right, he goes for all kind of things, the traditional thing as well as what he thought, or what in fact was imposed through the Wood Dispatch, or later on the Elphinstone Minutes also. I would be talking about that, but I'm just telling you that by telling you this trajectory, that how the education system in India was visualized, and what we have in the post-colonial period is an outcome of what got embedded in the 19th century. So the European knowledge became important. The three universities came into existence in 1857 through Three Universities Act. These universities were Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. I won't be going into the making of Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay. But I had an opportunity to look into the documents. These documents are lying at Teen Murti Library, how the making of Calcutta had taken place. The letters of Ashutosh Mukherjee, who was the Vice Chancellor of the Calcutta University, and the letters of Ashutosh Mukherjee and C.V. Raman, and you see, say many leaders, even Arbindo Ghosh. If you look into that, a lot of conflict was going on. What was actually imposed for the formation of the university, and what the people of India who had now got trained in Western pattern wanted the Indianization. So the national movement was not going on only for political freedom. There was a national movement going on for attaining the freedom as far as the thought process is concerned, knowledge production is concerned, knowledge dissemination is concerned. Today's topic is not in that direction, but I am trying to indicate with you by going through that trajectory which British has constructed for the formation of Indian education system. I am highlighting that yes, the resistance, the suggestions, the advisories from the indigenous lot, from the traditional lot, had always been there. And that's why you see, you have institutions coming up in Benares, the Banaras Hindu University, it comes out of a college. You have Aligarh Muslim University, again coming out of a college. So the thing is that the people in their own groups wanted their education, the traditional education. Initially, the Britishers thought that these things, two things will can survive. Later on, they found no, they have to be stopped, and the movement has to be in one direction. So by 1858, by Wood Dispatch, you see, through the parliamentary interventions from London, the movement in that direction had started. And this was basically can be described as Victorian era in Indian education, because it was Indian Universities Commission which had come up in 1902. So we must understand the long trajectory of Indian Education Commission also. So Wood Dispatch is one, Indian Education Commission is two, and say I am reading out a statement which comes as a resolution, which gives you an insight of the report of the Indian Education Commission. While the government acknowledged the mastery and comprehensive outline supplied by the dispatch, they deemed it of importance to review the progress made and to inquire how far the superstructure corresponded with the original design. Nearly a quarter of a century had since elapsed, and the Governor General in council believed that the time had now come for instituting a further and more careful investigation in the existing system and into the results attained by it than had hitherto been attempted. And it therefore comes a new man, you have heard of him, it was Lord Ripon, who is considered to be more benevolent as far as the earlier ones are concerned. Ripon and Curzon, they are always talked of that what kind of contribution, negative or positives, they had made. So the major recommendation which this commission gave: encouragement and support in indigenous school for extending elementary education by declaring elementary education of the masses as the most important priority area in education, to which strenuous government efforts should be directed. Now you see, in the post-colonial period, we are talking about literacy. Okay, in NEP we are talking about numeracy and other things. So now the thing is that does really the education policies of India has changed, or whatever the change is going to come as a result of the implementation of NEP 2020, is it really going to bring the paradigm shift? And this is what exactly we would be examining. I think that I am allotted only 1 hour. So very quickly, I am bringing in these points before you, and I will be sharing this document with you if you are interested, because I have to give you some MCQs also. So MCQs will be from those points which I am placing before you while I am giving a lecture, but some reading material I will be sharing with Shefali ji, so that you can read it, and in fact you can see these stages during the colonial period and the post-colonial period. So the commission suggestions which had come up for primary education, and the primary education has to be completed through local boards, municipalities, and later on going for secondary schools, colleges, and of course then going for the university. So this was suggested, and after repeal, it was Lord Curzon who came up with the education policy. And in this education policy, there were some 150 resolutions. The commission, in fact, worked under the presidency of Sir Thomas Raleigh, and you can clearly see the hierarchy is there from the lowest level to the highest level. And in fact, this had been adopted in the post-colonial period also, not much. Now, one more important thing which is coming as a part of Lord Curzon policy is that making interventions in different disciplines, right? Going for science, going for technology, going for medical, so on and so forth. So if one day I am speaking with you about the emergence of institutions, or the process of building of institution, and the making of the nation, that could be one theme where I would be talking to you in detail. But all these things were coming in the 20th century as a part of our educational policy. So going through Lord Curzon's educational policy norms is significantly important, because whatever had been done during this period of time, and the responses that had gone from Indian National Congress to Lord Curzon's educational policy, it was in 1913 that another educational policy had come. I am highlighting 3 points of it. The curricula of primary and secondary school should be made more practical and useful. And this is happening because of the interventions of the leaders like Gokhale, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, all of you know about him. The concerns which had been shown by Aurobindo Ghosh. There was a National Education Council's found, and it was at Calcutta. All the way from Baroda, Aurobindo has gone and wanted to understand what are the contents of the curriculum, what the students would be learning in these schools and colleges, whether they are science students, whether they are social sciences students, right? And when Aurobindo did not find anything concrete, he left for Pondicherry, and then he had gone into sannyas. So the life profile of Aurobindo is also very interesting. He has cleared IAS. He came to India, was in the services of the Baroda state because Maharaja had called him. Then he was the vice principal of the Baroda College, the college which becomes the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. And later he goes to Calcutta, gets in touch with Ashutosh Mukherjee, and was in discussion with Vivekanand and all. And in fact, what later he comes out with a literature that he produces being in Pondicherry is in fact, it speaks in volume that how he had visualized the education. He understands the limitation. So if you are in Pondicherry at ashram of Aurobindo, the kind of education system curriculum they have come up, and the kind of courses in Pondicherry you can do, they are different from what we are doing in our universities. So and by giving the example of Aurobindo, I am telling you that people were thinking about how the nation building process and new India should be emerging. In fact, if you take up the case of Mahatma Gandhi, even he was thinking of it. So there has been a debate with the coming of the colonizers, that what should be the pattern. And in fact, this is an ongoing process. I can say that NEP 2020 is not the final product. More products are going to come, because all of you are also an educationist, I am an educationist, and when we interact with our students, we realize that the policies or the system which is in operation is not addressing the issues in totality. Still, we have done so much, more is left. So again, coming back to the government resolutions of education policy for the year 93, which got implemented on February 21, what was thought of the curricula of primary and secondary school should be made more practical and useful. Facilities of higher education should be provided in India, so that Indian students may not have to go abroad. Instead of increasing the number of existing institutions, their standards should be raised. Now, when I am reading these 3 points before you, right, don't you realize that are these the same thing which are being spoken in 1913? They remain relevant in the 20th century, and I think that in the 21st century also, similar kind of statements would be echoing. So really, have we been successful in coming out a wonderful draft on education policy? Because I would be placing my thoughts on NEP 2020, but when I place my thought on NEP 2020 before you, I would be sharing the NEP 2020 document, which runs into 66 pages and speaks in volume, that the members of the committee, which in fact was in making, was pretty aware of the issues which are concerns of all nook and corners of the country. We talk of universality, but all of us know that establishing universality is not possible, because every nook and corner, each pocket has its specification. So two things are needed, therefore, adaptability, and of course we have to be liberal at certain end. And in fact, the policies which came in 1913, or we talk of other policies that came later, right, they had been emphasizing on that aspects. It was, as I had been talking about Calcutta University, I have been talking about Ashutosh Mukherjee also. So the Calcutta University Commission that came in 1917-19, Dr. Michael Sadler, the Vice Chancellor of Leeds University, reviewed the situation of the secondary schools, collegiate and university education. And in fact, they had suggested certain things, that this should be the pattern. And finally, what you see in the post-1919, this pattern was adopted, and many our grandparents have studied in that pattern. At this moment, I would not be going into details. What I can say is that when I'm sharing these notes with you in point form on the education, you will very well understand the system was 10 plus 2 plus 3, right? And then the system got converted to 10 plus 2 plus 2, 10 plus 2 plus 3. Now the NEP is suggesting other way. So if you look into the NEP 2020 document, I think that the maker of NEP 2020 document had been engaged in understanding the historical trajectory also. Another phase in the making of education in the colonial period had been the period between 1921 to 1937. This was where you see education was under diarchy system. The name of Montagu, the Secretary of the State for India, and Chelmsford, the Viceroy, is important. It was in the Government of India Act 1919. These issues were discussed, and education was placed into a category of transferred subject. We have a central list, we have a straight list, and we have concurrent list as far as Indian Constitution is concerned. So in this phase up till 1937, it was kept in the transfer subject. So it means that the central and the state will have certain rights, right, as far as production of knowledge is concerned through the establishment and Indian education system. I must also count on Central Advisory Board of Education, which is also called as CABE 1921. Another document which need your appraisal is Hartog Committee dated 1929, and finally the Government of India Act 1935, where education was placed under provincial autonomy, and this is very important. I must advise you that if you are really interested in understanding the patterns of colonial education system, and if you really want to do research in that, please get into the details of this. And the secondary readings would be from Aparna Basu, Kocher's work. They are very interesting, and in a very comprehensive way, they had placed the archival material before us. So this is important too. We have to look into the proceedings of the Indian National Congress, where you see education was an important concern for them. They were asking questions because employment was also an important concern for them. So education and employment being weaved together, the whole issue find a lot of space in the discussions of the proceedings or the national affair of the system. When this was not happening, our national leaders, they were working in a different way. Now let us talk about Rabindranath Tagore, right? Why there was a need of the establishment of Shanti Niketan. Okay, why in 1949 Vikram Sarabhai is laying the foundation of Physical Research Laboratory, why Indian Institute for Science Bangalore is coming, and why CV Raman is raising voices. See, basic idea was that when the Westerner were coming, when knowledge was coming, the system was coming, they in fact were applying the controls, which the Indian element was resisting. They wanted freedom, freedom, freedom. So it's not only the political freedom the makers of modern India were asking for. Our freedom was for thought, our freedom was for nurturing ourselves, our freedom was saving the culture. And that's why you see that the Indian national movement has several colors, several participants, several voices also. So the need of the hour, when we are trying to understand the education or the birth of the education system, what we have today, we need to understand these factors also, the intraneous factors as well as the extraneous factors also. So further moving, I would like to now say that when we got independence on 15th August 1947, the new schemes were in fact thought of, and very strongly the Sargent scheme envisaged a 40-year educational reconstruction plan for the country, which was reduced to 16 years by the Kher Committee. So by highlighting the names of the committee, where the focus, contracting the focus or expanding the focus has been there. The period between 1935 to 1947 is very significant, because it is in post 1947 or from 1950 onwards, when Indian Constitution was adopted, the education, Indian education system has to be restructured. So I will start with the Constitution. The Article 45 of the Indian Constitution explains that the state shall endeavor to provide within a period of 10 years from the commencement of this Constitution for free and compulsory education for all children until they complete the age of 14 years, and various other instructions were there. This is related to equality of opportunity in educational institutions, where Article 29 and 30 are important. Education for socially, economically backward classes of citizens, where Article 15, 17 and 46 were placed for safeguarding, and of course language and educational safeguard, again Article 29 So Indian Constitution has provided this privileges to us. And finally, what happened? The University Education Commission 1948-49 came, which in fact was having several points. I think that I should be placing these points before you. The aim of education must be to awaken and promote the innate ability of a person and to train him or her for development of self and democratic attitudes. Thus, the purpose of education is to acquaint an individual with his or her cultural heritage and to impart professional and vocational training. The Commission emphasized the role of postgraduate education, training and research for the advancement of knowledge. It stressed the university's role in studying agriculture in an agrarian economy like India and suggested that special attention should be paid to the development of higher education in rural areas. It also emphasized that scientific and technical base of the education should be strengthened. Realizing the importance of medium of instruction, the Commission recommended that English as a medium of instruction in higher education should be replaced as early as possible by an Indian language. A university degree should not be required for government administrative services. Special state examinations for recruitment to various state services should be organized. Realizing the deficiencies of the examination system and the magnitude of the wastage, the Commission recommended a thorough study of scientific methods of educational testing and appraisal. And once these things are pointed out in subsequent years, what has come? Report of the Education Commission 1964-66, which should be read by each of us. National Policy on Education 1968, about which I have referred earlier. Draft Policy on Education 1978. National Commission on Teachers 2 1983, Challenge of Education, a Policy Perspective 1985, National Policy on Education 1986, National Policy on Education, a Program of Education Action in 1986, Towards an Enlightened and Human Society, a Perspective Paper on Education, and National Policy on Education, a Program of Action in 1992. So these documents that had come, and in fact they were attempting to understand that or in what manner things would be made easy for the subjects of the country. And therefore you see a Muralidhar Commission had come up, which come up with a 240 page and 15 chapters report, and it is in this process in line we come and become got to know about Kothari Commission's report also. And it is the Kothari Commission, which were for 1964 to 66, had pointed out that what should be the future line. So I am reading out that also. Address the problems of national development, particularly issues concerning self-reliance, economic growth, employment, and social and national integration. Relate to the life, needs, and aspirations of the people, help improve productivity by emphasizing work experience, vocationalization, improvements in scientific and technological education and research, be perceived as the main instrument of change through human development, contribute to social and national integration, modernize the society through knowledge and its application, and inculcate social, moral, and spiritual values in the people. So that was the Kothari Commission's report. And finally, what you see, what was suggested, that national policies on education should be coming. So the points that were included for making the system work, content and processes of social education, education for women's equality, education of the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, and other backward sections, minorities education, education for handicapped, adult and continuing education, early childhood care and education, elementary education including non-formal education and Operation Blackboard, then secondary education and Navodaya Vidyalayas, vocationalization, higher education, open university and distance learning, technical and management education, research and development, media and educational technology, including use of computers in education, delinking degree from job and manpower planning, the cultural perspective and implementation of language policy, sports, physical education and youth, evaluation process and examination reforms, teachers and their training, management of education, rural universities and institutions. So these points were thought of, and accordingly you see that mushrooming of the institutions in different arenas had started taking place. And in fact, what was emphasized was that action oriented work has to be carried out. So much of work has been done. Still, when we discuss informally, we say that क्या हो गया, education का क्या हो रहा है. These are the simple statements which we are making. So policy makers were concerned with these informal statements and were trying to put inputs, and that's why what you see, that decentralization had got started within the disciplines, and the education system has actually got sketched on a very wide horizon. So all these issues were in fact related to the process of demand and supply. I am taking a pause for a minute to have a glass of water, and we'll be coming back to quickly to the document of NEP 2020. I think that all of you must be having this document at your disposal. If you are not, you can download it from the website of the Ministry of Education. If not, I will be sharing the same document with Shefali. You can go through that. I'm taking just half a minute to relax and have water. Can you see the National Education Policy document, which runs into 66 pages on your screen? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So you can see, I think this document has been seen by you. It reads National Education Policy 2020. And then it runs into sections, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and total themes are 27, and the 27th is implementation. In the introduction of the document, the committee members have clearly stated through one paragraph: education is fundamental for achieving full human potential, developing an equitable and just society, and promoting national development. Providing universal access to quality education is the key to India's continued ascent and leadership on the global stage in terms of economic growth, social justice and equality, scientific advancement, national integration, and cultural preservation. Universal high quality education is the best way forward for developing and maximizing our country's rich talents and resources for the good of the individual, the society, the country, and the world. India will have the highest population of young people in the world over the next decade, and our ability to provide high quality educational opportunities to them will determine the future of our country. This very paragraph can be taken as the preamble of the NEP 2020, because when I was reading this document and when I was sharing with you about the progressive growth of the education or modern education system in India since the colonizers have taken over, the concerns are very well stated here. What I also see is that this is the Indian perspective. Earlier, when we are looking into the first document of the colonial period, we see it was the Westerners' perspective. So this is a shift that has taken place. Okay, so can we as educationists consider this as a paradigm shift? I don't know about your answer. My answer is no. And I have a reason for saying no to it, because I have seen the similar kind of announcement in the in the policy document of 1968, 1986, 1992 also. Because when an introduction of the preamble is written, it is beautifully crafted. Now the problem is with how the implementation had been. All of us have studied in different kind of schools, colleges, universities. We have undergone different kind of examination and evaluation systems. We ourselves are engaged into that, but every time we find that the what has been said and what has been the objective has not been attained completely. Partial success is there. So when NEP 2020 was being crafted, was being carried out, was being done, the people who were contributing to it were raising this concern that what about implementation? Coming with a document is very good, but implementation has not been done. In fact, 10% or 20% implementation in the past has not happened. So emphasis has to be on the implementation. So the moment when in the month of May, the document was circulated in the universities, the ministry was looking that who is going to implement. And I think that in your institutions, in your universities that had come, even my university had come, my vice chancellor has been proactive, have sent this document. And in fact, all of us were asked to read this document seriously. And of course, the portions that had come to us was related to the higher education. But when I am talking to you, I am talking to you about this document in a complete form. So I will be browsing you and taking you travel through these 66 pages. Few things which are important is that you have to make it for promoting national development. You have to participate in global competitiveness. You have to look for your economic growth. You have to look for integrity. You have to look for cultural preservation. So many things are there, and in fact, such an opportunity to be provided that people are involved in learning throughout their lives. So 2030 had been the year where this lifelong learning document was also added. So if you read through this document, the concerns of the yesteryears, maybe 100 more than 150 years, maybe 200 years, are can be seen in the introductory document. And in fact, a historical background is also suggested is the interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, and a process of research given due emphasis. The limitations and the achievements of the previous policies are also highlighted, and in fact what is highlighted is the principal aspects, and that I would be reading before you. The fundamental principle that will guide both the education system at large as well as the individual institutions within it are recognizing, identifying, and fostering the unique capabilities of each student. So I think that the emphasis on an individual in this policy makes this policy unique, special. But I am asking a question to you. You are a teacher. How many students you are having in your class? Can anybody answer? Please volunteer. How many students you are having in one class? Shefali ji?
60 or 70, ma'am.
60. Okay, now Vinod, can you answer? And what is your discipline?
Psychology, ma'am.
Okay, now just imagine, psychology is such a difficult subject, right? You have to really train each and every student. Okay, so I can see that Shelley is saying 40 students. Like, is it possible in 1 hour, 60 minutes class or 90 minutes class in the online mode we are taking 90? Can we really concentrate on an individual student?
No, ma'am. It's not possible, ma'am.
It's not so. See, now the thing is that implementation is going to be a challenge. And if implementation is wanted, more human resource should be employed, more infrastructural facility has to be provided, right? The education has to be of low cost. The state has to, in fact, put in. And I remember my niece Ajay always says they had come up with such a beautiful document, but what is an irony that the percentage for education in the budget had been reduced. Just imagine how the implementation is going to be possible. And I think that we as a teacher, we have to really think about the solutions. I'm not saying that we have to say no as far as implementation is concerned. We should come out with a solution, and that's why what is has been suggested is innovativeness. So basically the NEP 2020 in one way is also suggesting us to be more innovative, more research oriented, and more self reliant. Then only it is possible. So it means that the student, the teacher, and the taught both have to be working together. So when we will continue with the understanding of the document, we will see that what is feasible, where we need solutions by carrying out our innovative skills. So by sensitizing teachers as well as parents to promote each student's holistic development in both academic and non-academic spheres. According the highest priority to achieving foundational literacy and numeracy by all students by grade 3, flexibility so that learners have the ability to choose their learning trajectories and programs and thereby choose their own paths in life according to their talents and interests. No hard separations between arts and sciences, between curricular and extracurricular curricular activities, between vocational and academic streams, etc., in order to eliminate harmful hierarchies among and silos between different areas of learning. Multidisciplinarity and holistic education across these sciences, social sciences, arts, humanities, and sports for multidisciplinary world in order to ensure the unity and integrity of all knowledge. And it is in this way every aspect of human development in terms of principle is said, but what I see is that the challenge as far as implementation is concerned. So the vision is there, and they divide it in school education where they said flexibility is there, the home will be the first pathshala, then accordingly the growth of the child would be taking place. But another challenge is that what is already existing, how you will undo it and how you will implement the new. So it means that the hybrid category is going to further place more challenges to us. So again the implementation is going to be challenging, and the solution will come by adoption of innovative skills. This is what I feel. And at my end, when the implementation of NEP 2020 has been announced in my university, I have started following it in my daily classes routine also. I have started orienting my students. In fact, in my class, I am telling them the difference between the two. I teach master's program. I have my PhD students. I tell them that where the future lies, what kind of research work they are doing, how they should be now studying, and how they should be changing of patterns of their analysis. This is how within after reading this NEP document, I have started doing it. So I'm just sharing my experience. But first, in the first go when I have read this document, I was really feeling very tired, and I was feeling that so many good things are there, but I was depressed also that how the implementation would be taking place. So far you see that very few universities, they have agreed for implementation, but they still say that implementing this thing is requires human resource, requires infrastructure, requires more time, requires more facilities, and of course continuous support is also there. Then there are challenges which this document is talking in terms of dropouts and all that, and then they are thinking in terms of widening the horizon of the system. So curriculum and pedagogy is also suggested. Restructuring of school curriculum, then the structured design is also suggested. When you will go through, you will find that it is like doing and undoing the things of the previous years. And the final question would be coming to your mind is that how we are going to meet out these challenges. And naturally, we look towards our senior educationists who would be telling us now what to do, now what to do, now what to do. And similar kind of exercise is happening on my campus. I was the part of the committee for implementation of NEP, because the document has to be prepared and it has to be showcased before the minister few months back. We had brainstorming sessions. But what we did is that, depending upon the structure of our own university, I am sure the structure of my university does not matches with the structure of BPS Mahila Vishwavidyalaya. So how come this NEP which I am suggesting will be adopted by them? So what I think is that autonomy has to be needed. Every university needs autonomy, and the autonomy should depend upon the kind of talent that university is having. So what can be the common minimum program in NEP 2020? I think can be followed by all, and rest depends upon the specifications, uniqueness of the university. So this document is there, and I think that each of us should be reading this document. Why we should read document? Because we are parents also. So it means that we have to know what is happening at the primary level, at the school level, at the intermediary level, and at the college level and the university level. Being the parents, being the teachers, we have to see how the method should be adopted as far as implementation is there too. What kind of fruits these results are going to bear, so that the students who are engaging themselves for a long period of time, what would be their future as far as their economic sustainability is concerned. So I place this document before you, and questions I am looking for, not the questions, rather the observations, the comments, because I'm also in the process of understanding this new phenomenon, which in fact is suggesting a paradigm shift. And we have to really see that is paradigm shift within the given circumstances is a strong possibility. Thanking you. Thank you, madam. Shefali ji. You can ask questions to me meanwhile Shefali is not there, or you can come up with observations and comments.